Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. Welcome. How are you? So this week we are celebrating winter solstice, Christmas, Kwanzaa. We are deep into winter. How are you doing? How's the weather? How's the overwhelm? How's the self-care? Jen Perry is my guest today, and Jen is going to be coming on the podcast to do some episodes with me. And even though she was on a few weeks ago talking about boundaries, I really didn't read her bio. So let me just tell you a little bit about Jen. Jen Perry has been a psychotherapist for 20 years. She specializes in helping highly sensitive people thrive in work, love, and parenting highly sensitive children. Jen is passionate about using mindfulness and compassion-based approaches to ameliorate human suffering. What I love about Jen is we've been friends for a few years. We've never met in person, but we've worked on a couple of projects together. And in this episode, you will see actively the ways that we nurture authenticity and intimacy in our relationship. I talk about some of the fears that came up for me around the two of us creating some podcast episodes together. We talk about our fears, and Jen talks about, and I love this, that communication is an act of service and an act of love to the relationship. And we talk about this whole thing of taking responsibility for other people's feelings, how you can do repair and attachment work. The guilt of placating reinforces the narrative. So if I have this fear that I'm too much and Jen caters to that, then it reinforces that narrative. I value Jen so much and the high level of authenticity that we have in our relationship. It's really been a very healing, nurturing relationship for me. Towards the end of the episode, Jen talks about some of the gifts of being highly sensitive, and she gives an example of her daughter who's highly sensitive, and she's a spirited, spunky kid. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how's it going?
Hi, Patricia. How is it going? I haven't been able to ask myself that all day. I haven't even taken a moment to ask.
I know. I think this is just going to be an authentic, unscripted conversation, which is really what I enjoy the most. I think where I can start is, since you and I talked about recording episodes together, it activated some fear and insecurity for me. And we had talked on Tuesday about when we were going to record, and then normally we talk a little bit more, and I didn't hear from you. And the Gremlins in my head, I was really feeling afraid that I was being too controlling. And I told you what my concerns were, that the recording is important and recording on time and me not getting into a pinch as far as having episodes come out. So we talked about how to navigate around that so it wouldn't put me in a pinch. But it's interesting, instead of myself viewing that as having great self-care, my gremlins were saying, I'm just too picky. You're not going to want to record with me. It's going to wreck our friendship. I mean, it just is so interesting. And so I just texted you and said, like, hey, how are you feeling about recording? Because I'm feeling kind of insecure.
Yes, I was so glad you did too. It was so funny. I was thinking earlier, we could just give all your listeners access to all of our polos back and forth. And then it just made me laugh because we do go, it's just such a beautiful way to stay in touch. And I really value that. I actually recommend it to all my HSP clients to start up a Marco Polo connection with somebody just to have that place to land. I love how you and I have this ground rule that if something comes up that feels like it needs a more timely response, that we text each other. So I was really, really happy when you texted me. I think we may have talked about this before. I consider that instead of as a challenge, it's an act of service. It's a true act of love to the relationship and to the care and maintenance of the relationship. So I was like, oh yeah, and I've been busy, it's been ridiculous the last year. And you're important to me. And to have that opportunity to be like, oh yeah, no way. And then have a nice texting conversation that felt very connective and, included other things like kayak paddles and stuff like that, right? It's just beautiful. And, just it helps maintain that closeness. So I was really excited and just happy. I think it's part of what makes our relationship really strong.
Yeah, it's really been a blessing what I've learned through my relationship with you. And I was looking, I think we probably started connecting around the spring of 2019 because we launched the online HSP course in June of 2019. So we're coming up on about 2 years of friendship now. And so much of what our relationship has been about is showing up authentically, messy, imperfectly. My fear is always about being too much. And as some of the listeners know, I'm working on a book right now and I'm needing to revisit some really painful parts. And so that wound of being too much, it is just up for me. And I'm really trying to lean into that to get more information about how does that show up, even with all the healing that I've done, like flipping between feeling like I'm too much and you're not going to want to be around me. And it's okay if you're hearing about the messy parts in my life, but they don't have to do with you. Then you have room for that. But what if I'm having feelings about our recording or the organization? And what if I get irritated about something? Like, do I tell you? Do I not tell you? Can the relationship tolerate that? Like, those are the things that are coming up for me. And I don't even want to talk about it.
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, again, the whole frame of those types of conflicts, right? Or fears. I mean, they're not even conflicts. They're conflicts in our head, right?
And yeah, it hasn't even happened.
It's like that Mark Twain quote, right? I've lived through many terrible things in my lifetime, a few of which have actually happened, right? And then to reach out, it's an opportunity for intimacy, right? Intimacy. It's an opportunity for me to get to know you better, for me to know, what your triggers are, what your tropes are. And, I have mine. All those like flaws and foibles, right, that human beings have, and to have that place where they can be brought up safely and with spaciousness and curiosity. I mean, I certainly saw how you could interpret my my silence that way, and I didn't feel defensive because that's, to use a metaphor we talked about last time, is that's your tomato jar. And I can help you come over and kind of, maybe help you with the tomato jar, cleaning up your tomato jar. But it's not my responsibility to, right? Although I do think that part of being in a caring relationship is showing an interest and a curiosity. Yeah, I think if there's one thing I'm really happy or that I work on shedding, right? I do this little full moon ritual where it's like you pick an intention, something that you want to shed, that you want to release. It was really that self-defensiveness, right? That having to be like responsible, that I've now made you feel that way. I have to do something about it. So the tomato jar metaphor is like a tomato jar smashes at your feet and it's your tomato jar, but you have to clean it up. You're responsible for it. And it's when we take over responsibility for other people's reactions, emotional reactions to the things that we do. Right. And one of the cores of being able to do that, though, is to have self-compassion, right? So if you're going to shed self-defensiveness, you have to be your own soft place to land and making space for, because I could have gone into like a torturous place, which I probably would have done years ago, of this, I've disappointed Patricia, and it's my fault that she feels this way. And then, that whole train wreck of now, what does this mean for our collaboration? And I've ruined it all. And you just go down there. So that the self-compassion is like, oops, and like the space for repair, really, right? Because attachment is that rupture and repair. And if we don't reach out to let people know that things have ruptured a little bit, or maybe they've ruptured in our heads, then there's no opportunity for repair.
Right. And had you responded from a place of guilt or placating me, that just reinforces my I'm too much. That would feed into the narrative.
Right, because now I have to take care of you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So we almost create, it would create.
So then we recreate that dynamic of I feel like I'm too much and then you cater or placate me and then I really am too much. And then if I tell you, or you get defensive, and I have this dynamic in another relationship where our wounds collide. So if I am having insecurities, which are totally my own insecurities, and I name them, it activates defensiveness on the part of this other person. And so I just don't bring any of my insecurities to the relationship because it just gets ugly.
Yeah. I tell you, I love my tomato jar metaphor. I don't know if it makes a lick of sense to anybody else, but I'm like, so to me, that would mean like you're smashing tomato jars at your feet and I'm smashing tomato jars at my feet. And we may have a big emotional mess to clean up, but,
Right.
we can kind of track, some of the emotional reactivity and, trace it back because it comes from some old places. And I do think that, one of the things that's unique in our Marco Polo exchanges is that we will really track each other's stuff a bit, like you've reflected things back and, I know that some of my family history and you'll be like, sounds like that was, how things were growing up. You weren't, it wasn't okay to express. You had to show up in a certain way to be acceptable and, stuff like that. So like, it's good to have that underlying language and to use and a way to understand. And then because our brains, the way they are built, right? Sometimes we get hijacked by the more primitive part of our brain, and we have to allow for that and create spaciousness.
Right. If you're listening to this and any of this resonates with you, here are some things that you can do to check in. And what I was able to do when I was having, making up the story in my head that I was too much for Jen and she didn't want to do recording with me because of, I'm just too much. I thought, is this true? And can I get a reality check? Because I know you're busy. I know you live a busy life. There haven't been things in my life that I've needed you for, and there's been more, the expectations have been lower. And so now we had this expectation or plan to record together, and then that activated some of my insecurities and my fears. So reaching out and reminding myself that even though it's scary, it's a chance to test the relationship. We can kind of take it to a new level and see how much can the relationship tolerate. Because I'm embarrassed to say this, but because of my attachment injuries, I almost always prepare for the relationship to end and surviving that, because that is what my worst fear is. Do I act on that? No. Do I share a lot of that information with you? Not really. I mean, we're talking about it right now, but that's all my junk.
I admire that.
And I'm sharing
I
this.
just have to interject. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to do it.
No.
I really do. I admire that like inner strength, because I think one of the most important aspects of having an authentic relationship with someone is taking those risks in big ways and small, in small ways that the relationship may end. And I mean, I kind of take that all the way out. Like, this doesn't end well altogether. Like, all relationships are going to end in the end, right? But it's like this little microcosm of that, like that you have to be authentic and see if the relationship has the legs. Maybe cover any little ears that are listening. But like the real premise of like, you can't F it up. Like, that would mean that we had reached the limits of, of my, I guess, ability to like be one of your people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay, but it's worth the risk, because otherwise, what do you have? If you've hid now, right, and not shared, and of course, this is really close, supportive, safe relationships that I'm talking about, right? Like, this doesn't mean you bare your soul at work or in all these, like, we have to be a little bit measured, but in some other places sometimes, but that it is worth the risk to have someone really know your heart, and you have to give them that opportunity.
And the gift of that is that I feel like I can show up in any condition to our relationship. And up until now, you've always embraced that, the parts of me that I feel like are really yucky and I don't want to show to anybody. And it's helped me to accept more of who I am. I mean, I have to be okay with it to share it with you. I don't feel like I go holding out my heart and going, am I okay? And will you take my heart? It's my job to hold on to my heart and to own it. And I may open up the little door to my heart and give you a glimpse in. But ultimately, or if we're using your analogy, it's my tomato jar.
Yes.
That doesn't quite work for me in this analogy. I have to be okay with it. But when I take that risk, I've found that I have a handful of people that no matter what's going on, I can show up being messy and they love and embrace me. And I think many of us weren't allowed to be who we were when we were children because our parents just couldn't manage it for whatever reason. So we look to the outside, we figure out what they need us to be and what their capacities are. We feel like we're too much. We create this false self that works for our family of origin. And then we continue to live that way generally because we figure everybody else must not be able to tolerate who we are. And this process of refocusing back on ourselves and what do I need and what do I want and what do I feel with whatever our primary wounds are, and finding people that are safe to start being okay with it ourselves and then allowing that healing to happen in our relationships with other people. And that has been an amazing gift. So it's like holding both of those things in one hand, that fear of what if this ruins our relationship? What if the relationship can't tolerate it? What if I have to leave the relationship? What if I have expectations and you let me down? What if I let you down? And the opportunity of building even more intimacy and closeness that I may not even be able to imagine what that's like if I'm willing to continue to show up and be authentic and vulnerable.
Yeah, so well said. Yes. And I always appreciate, because of course, if anyone could see me today showing up messy, and I do think that that was one of our real strengths. Another time that we collaborated really closely on the HSP groups, right? The highly sensitive person group, was we would have these little check-ins. And often, I don't call it anxiety. I call it just nervous system activation. You're stepping up, showing up no matter what. And we would have these little debriefs about it. And once I was able to speak it, whether it was, I'm having insomnia or my dog isn't doing well. It was a bunch of little things, small things. I think once it was my dad, right? It was in surgery. To speak it and to be held and seen and embraced. It's okay. I have no doubt that at any one of those times, if I needed to not record, that you would have that grace for me. The funny thing about that, it really invites it to be okay. And I was surprised at some of the things that I was able to do, even when, if I hadn't been embraced by someone as openly as you, I would have gone into more and more of a shutdown. Whereas when you meet that energy of, hey, I'm here with you, you're human, I don't expect you to be superhuman, somehow it really lifts and lets us do things in a variety of circumstances. We can surprise ourselves, right?
Right. I think we would meet weekly in order to work on curriculum and to record videos. And I would say probably 85% of the time, one or both of us had stuff going on and we didn't want to show up. But because we had that commitment, we showed up and we talk about the junk that was going on in our lives. Just that process of being seen and heard and validated allowed that energy to move through. So then we could go ahead and do what we had originally set out to do. And I would love to see in safe spaces more of that authenticity, because feelings are just energy. And when we don't express them, provided it's a safe environment, that stuff just gets blocked up and it blocks our energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this part of our conversation has such wide implications, right? I've seen it with, in parenting, to be able to have that open, spacious, curious, not furious, embracing however it is your child's showing up in the moment. And it does, it acts like a tuning fork. In IFS, we would call that self energy, where you just have this, you sort of drop your control agenda, you drop your agenda, and you just get really curious. And it's amazing, the flow that can happen and the healing that can happen. In IFS, that self energy is inherently healing. It's amazing if you can just hold space for someone. It really does loosen up.
It's very powerful. I think often people think that they have to provide solutions or do all of this stuff. And sometimes just holding space for someone can be so incredibly powerful.
Tomato jar. They feel responsible to take care of the tomato jar instead of you've got a tomato jar there, don't you? That's broken and smashed on the ground.
Right.
I wonder what we could do about that.
Right. So what else do you want to focus on today? Because I love this conversation we're having, but my gremlins are going you're always talking about the stuff that you struggle with. People don't want to hear about you anymore. I think people want to hear about you, Jen.
Oh, gosh. I know, right? I was thinking about that when we were getting ready. I'm I think we're going to need more than a half an hour, Patricia. No. I mean, I will say I do love being an HSP. If you think about it like a trained up HSP, someone that really has learned about it and kind of harnessed its power, I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I know wherever you are in your HSP journey, I know tracking mine a little superficially, it's not knowing about it at all and living in a non-HSP world, right? Where you feel like you have three heads or what's wrong with you. You're just this weird duck your whole life because you're too sensitive and it you're doing it on purpose or something, right? There's something that you could do about this to just be more normal. Some of us live with that for a really, really long time, right? We try to fit in. And I think that's where the whole not being authentic, is another place where that gets born, right? Where it's not, not well received. People don't know what to do with you. Okay, I don't, and you don't know what to do with yourself because, if we're only 15 to 20% of the population, it's not like there's a lot of us around to show each other the ropes. And then there's that moment when you learn, right? And you hear that phrase and you're oh my goodness, this explains everything. think if I ever went through the phase, I know I help clients through it a lot of the whole, like, I hate being an HSP. Like, I don't want this. Like, somebody take it away from me. Or, it can come with some both relief and grief, right? And then just doing that, kind of digging in to do the work. And I found that fascinating, to really be encouraged to center myself. I think especially as women, right? Because we're always there for everybody else. And there was a time, I think I was in my later 20s, and I felt like I had kind of healed past the point where I could only validate my existence for the degree to which I was of service to other people. I still serve people all the time, but now it comes from a very different place. Being able to be sensitive, be able to be touched deeply by art or music, to be able to make all of these. What is overthinking? Like, right, we make all of these associations and connections that are brilliant sometimes, right? Torturous other times. But again, it's not something we're doing on purpose, but it is a gift to be able to creatively, put things together. I'm always coming back to that drum of self-care and boundaries, and just really being able to center yourself, and then to be able to explore all of the fun. Because we're kind of spooky in what we can pick up. Actually, see a number of people on my caseload that are psychic, or that are, that on the other end is a part of being HSP, I believe. And so that empath, and then, there's varying degrees of this. There's no one way to be an HSP. There's so many ways, right, to show up. But if we can get really curious and not close down, we get really curious about our gifts, it is a really fun exploration.
Yeah. And my understanding is that some HSPs are empaths and some empaths are HSPs, but just because you're one doesn't necessarily mean that you're the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny how, we use these lenses, right, to try to explain our experiences in languaging. So I know some people use them interchangeably, and then I know that there's also important distinctions. I know Elaine Aron makes distinctions. The more interesting aspects, powerful aspects of being an HSP, being able to think out of the box, right? Being able to think creatively. I wish we had more strong HSPs in leadership positions, right? I'm so curious about that evolutionary purpose of HSPs, because it seems across 100 species, there must be some reason for us.
Yeah, I think we definitely need HS leaders, just because they tend to have that compassion and ability to see more than one perspective. But when you are an empowered HSP, that ability to see what the truth is, to know what needs to be done, to be self-directed, we have all those qualities. And I think that often when there's wounding, people get caught up in the being sensitive and being emotional or being reactive. And there is that overlay between wounding and the trait of being an HSP. And to be honest with you, I don't know that I've ever met an HSP that doesn't have some type of wounding, childhood emotional neglect, CPTSD. And so we just have an opportunity to heal that so that we really can enjoy the gifts that we have. And whether you're an HSP or not, life is hard. I really have a thing about when I see this, like, do these 5 things and you won't have anxiety. Do these things to not be depressed. I just call bull hockey on that. I think it's such a disservice, because life is about having ups and downs no matter who you are. I don't know. I saw you react. So what do you want to say about that?
Oh, no, I'm just like, I feel that in my bones. Like, I take that right into this. Like, life has always been a struggle. We live in a bizarre period of time where somehow we get this download that if it's struggling or if it's hard, you must be doing something wrong. And it's just not true. We want, anxiety is a part of our human experience. Of course, what we need is support along the way, right? We need to get out of the echo chambers of our head when we're anxious about something, test it out in reality, right? And, we need community, we need support, we need not to be so isolated. That perfectionism, that idea that somehow you can, in our field, you can therapy yourself out of being human. Like, that's just not going to happen, nor should it.
Right. And I don't know about you, but when I was in therapy, I never talked to my therapist about it. But because I still struggled, I just kept feeling like I was broken and there was something wrong with me. I've talked about this before, being in therapy for my eating disorder and thinking about what I was going to go binge on when I left therapy, because it would be so dysregulating for me. And I didn't even know to bring it up and talk about it. So the conversations that I have now with friends like you and other HS therapists about the things that we struggle with that nobody wants to talk about because we're therapists and we're supposed to have all of our stuff together. And the reality is we're caring, sensitive, empathic human beings. And part of life is a little bit of struggle.
Absolutely. It's funny. I was thinking when you were talking about the wounding, right? So I have a little HSC at home. I have two of them actually. And my daughter just recently got diagnosed, right, with ADHD and dyslexia. One thing I know about being an HSP is that we're also pretty socially justice minded. I think as children, sometimes that can make adults a little uncomfortable. My daughter's, she actually loves, I think, I don't know, my intuition is that she really enjoys making people a little uncomfortable. She likes shocking people a bit. And it's, as far as HSP parenting, right? Like how to parent an HSP so that they aren't burdened or wounded in some of these ways. And we're not, again, we're human. We're not going to be able to avoid all wounds for our children. And I'm not so sure that should be our bar or expectation. I just don't think it's possible in life. Not that we shouldn't want that, of course. I mean, we love our kids. We don't want to ever see anything like that come to them. But, is it appropriate? Again, because stuff happens in life. I think the environment really does matter. My daughter, her little social justice warriorship in her new school, she got one of the, it was a worksheet, like you had to match things. And one was with the general noun to the proper noun. And it was restaurant. And then it was Chick-fil-A. And my daughter is a huge LGBTQ activist at 9 years old and brought it to her teacher's attention. And her teacher was wonderful and all about it and said, thank you for bringing it to her attention. I think even changed the restaurant name in there. It made me cry at her parent-teacher meeting conference because, it's not lost on me that she could have been met with that kind of either defensive or, that sort of adult authoritarian, not curious, right? How that, might have worked to shut her down. And so staying really open and curious with our kids and with ourselves, because so much of this, I think, is reparenting us and giving ourselves what we didn't necessarily get.
Absolutely. I love that example too. And when we talked about this offline about how your daughter likes to kind of see if she can get a rise out of people, I love that about her. She has this amazing energy. And when you and I talk about it, you've been really clear about not wanting to stomp that out in her, that that's a big part of who she is and wanting to encourage that fiery, alive, spunky piece. You have different words that you use. What are the words that you use?
Well, I think that moment that I was thinking of, I remember looking at her and just not knowing what to do, and just being, God, I don't want to parent the power out of you, right? I want you to really, to keep that energy. She's a little, I think, high sensation seeking, right? She's loves spinning around and going upside down and she's very kinesthetic. And it's spunky. It's, I'm hoping, we all have hopes and dreams for our kids that it is that kind of strong leadership. And I can't imagine, as an HSP, if I knew from a young age and I had that person, showing me how to embrace with empathy, right? Because then that translates into self-empathy, all of the intensity, the intense feelings, the intense, she's intense in a lot of ways, intensely inquisitive, intensely empathic, with her classmates and stuff. And just to encourage that instead of shut it down.
Right. And I think that many of us have internalized that, we're too intense, we're too analytical, people feel uncomfortable around us because we're truth tellers, all of those things. And so we've learned to make ourselves really small because we don't want to make other people uncomfortable. And what you're talking about with your daughter is allowing that, the word that I use is fiery, powerful, passionate part of her to remain intact and to not squash that out of her so that she can continue to have that power as she grows up. And for most of us, me included, how do I get in touch with that spunky part of myself and know that I have a right to take up space? And if I make other people feel uncomfortable, that's their tomato jar, it's not mine. I think that can be a huge part of our healing for those of us that really tend to be much more outspoken and more of leaders. I know for a lot of HSPs, it's really uncomfortable and they would rather kind of keep the peace, and that's fine too. But I think that this is a really important aspect of where many of us have wounding.
Yes. In IFS, internal family systems, the lens would be that some of those powerful, powerful child parts, intense, right? Fiery, passionate, I love your words around it, become what's called exiles when they're not accepted in the environment, right? And the beautiful thing is that we still have those exiles. It just takes a little work to get to them, right? And to have your system realize that it's safe to reintegrate those parts of us back into us so we never lose them. They kind of get sent away. They kind of get exiled for a little while. It certainly doesn't feel safe to have them. I know it didn't for me, but it is all still there.
Yeah, absolutely. Jen, we need to wrap up. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we end?
I love doing these with you, so I look forward to continuing our HSP conversations and seeing you on Marco Polo.
Me too. Thanks, Jen. Have a great day.
You too.
All right, bye. Hey again. I'm curious to know what you thought of the episode. What I'm wondering is, what are your relationships like? And do you have relationships where you can show up authentically and you have people that can really hear what your concerns are and share in that level of vulnerability? I was just talking with a friend the other day who was saying that she felt that she was socially awkward because she was out with someone and the conversation just didn't go anywhere. We often think this is us, but it takes two people to have rolling conversation, to have intimacy in relationships and authenticity, that I can put that out there. But if the other person doesn't have the ability, the skill, the capability, the willingness, it's going to fall short. And chances are I'm going to think that I've done something wrong, but it really takes two people. Relationships take work. It means having to work through our stuff. It is not easy, but it just makes me wonder, do you have relationships where you can show up authentically and people are really able to embrace who you are? It's been such a healing, nurturing gift, my relationship with Jen, and I'm excited to share it with you. And if you're not having that and you want to do some work, Jen and I both see clients. You can reach out to either one of us. Jen's contact information is in the show notes. You can reach me at unapologeticallysensitive.com on my website. There's everything you need to know. And Jen and I are both incredibly skilled at working through relationships and intimacy problems and so much more. If you're interested in taking the online HSP course, registration will open December 15th, 2021, and registration will close December 29th, 2021. The course will start January, I believe it's Monday the 11th, and it will run from 3 to 4:20 p.m. PST for 10 weeks, but it's going to be extended a little bit because there are a couple of Monday holidays. If you go to my website, unapologeticallysensitive.com. There's HSP groups page, and all of the information is at the bottom, and you can register from that page on the 15th. These courses have been great for connecting HSPs together, to see what it's like to be with other HSPs, to learn about boundaries and perfectionism, creating the lifestyle that honors the HSP, authentic communication. And Jen and I created this course together. I'm teaching it this round, but the videos that you see every week are of Jen and I talking about whatever the topic is. I hope you were doing well. I hope you were finding peace. And if it's a rough and rocky time of year, that's okay too. It's okay to be wherever you're at, to be feeling whatever you're feeling. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.